Hello YouTube and welcome to the third episode of Sega SG Awesome. Today we're going to be looking at the second game for the SG-1000, Safari Hunt. My one sentence review of Safari Hunt is, Safari Hunt is not a good game. If you watched the second episode where I reviewed the first game, Borderline, you remember me saying that Borderline looked bad, but it actually had some pretty redeeming qualities, and once you kind of learned how to play it, it got pretty good. Safari Hunt is not like that. The best part of Safari Hunt is by far the box art. The box art is actually fairly representative of the game, which is kind of rare for games at that time. Atari 2600 games used to always have box art that were vastly different than what the game could actually promise. But this one, it shows the 4 animals that are coming after you. You're a hunter, makes sense. All of them look extremely pissed. Everyone looks pissed except the snake. The snake looks at you kind of lovingly, like it likes getting hit with the tranquilizer. Like a junkie waiting for its next hit. But despite the game not being fantastic, there's a lot of good things about it historically. You see, whenever I started this project, I kind of thought of the early video games, the earliest ones, as just being the high score games. Like Kaboom in the Atari 2600, you had one level, basically, and you were just going through and trying to get the biggest score that you could. Then I discovered penny arcades, where you put in a penny and you get a certain amount of time to just do an activity. Safari Hunt is kind of a missing link. It has those electromechanical qualities to it, where you have a certain amount of time, gauged by the fuel, and you just do the same thing over and over. But it is kind of getting into that high score mechanic. It has different rounds based on the scores, but it still very much seems rooted in the electromechanical penny arcade style. And what makes this game absolutely fascinating, in my opinion, is that this is a third progression of the game. So you can actually not only see that it's kind of a missing link, but you get to see the progression of it from a much more electromechanical style to the much more Atari style that we have in this SG-1000 version. The original version of it, called Safari, was made in 1977, the same year as Sega's last electromechanical game, and it very much is a electromechanical style. In Safari, you've got 30 seconds to shoot as many animals as you could. They would go through and get faster and faster, and if you ever got hit, you would suffer a penalty. This feels like a carnival-style game. But then in 1980, Safari got almost a kind of sequel. They did this on the Vic Dual, and it looks a lot more like Borderline. But this time they called it Tranquilizer Gun. Apparently, someone at Sega thought Safari needed a little bit more of a politically correct name, I'm guessing. But this game is a lot more just kind of Atari-like. You actually go through and you try to get a high score, but it still has those old electromechanical qualities. It is Tranquilizer Gun that Safari Hunting was made off of. Much like Borderline was a 1980 Vic Dual game that came to the SG-1000, this is a 1980 Vic Dual game that came to the SG-1000. The thing is, this one's just not as fun. Where Borderline, none of the levels are necessarily that fun. They weren't amazing. They couldn't carry the whole game. You at least broke up the monotony by switching to a new level at each board. This one doesn't do that. You've got the same level and you've just got a chance to kind of increase the rounds. But you're just doing the same thing over and over. And it's not that good to begin with. So it can only hold your attention for so long. The basic goal of the game is to go through the maze, tranquilize as many animals as you can, and take them back to your Jeep. But like most good games, it starts with a simple premise, and then it just ends up getting a little bit more complicated when you get a little bit deeper. This is where Safari Hunting fails. Where good games such as Pac-Man builds up a little bit more complicated whenever you actually figure out the patterns and kind of get all that going on, this builds up the complication right at the beginning. Let's take a look at the anatomy of the arcade screen, and that'll give you an idea of how the game's actually played. If you look up at the top, you'll see that there's a high score. There's also the round, which you increase a round by shooting all 4 of the different animals. There's snakes, gorillas, lions, and elephants. If you shoot all 4 of them without taking them into your Jeep and you have them tranquilized at the same time, you go up to the next round. Then you have your lives. You lose a life whenever you run out of time and the animals come after you. Basically, whenever an animal touches you, that's when you die. And then there's more information down at your actual Jeep. On the Jeep in the trailer area, there's a picture of each of the 4 animals. Underneath it is a number. This number tells you how many of those animals you have. The point is, once you actually get all of the same animal, so if you get 1 set of each, so a snake, gorilla, lion, elephant, you gain some extra time. If you get 2 sets of each animal, then you get more time. And the timer is up at the very front of your Jeep. Now you have to watch out because the animals, once they actually come over to your Jeep, they can actually release some of the animals, so that kind of prevents a few things from happening as well. But the rules don't stop there. Whenever you tranquilize an animal, they basically go to sleep. At that point, you've got to get it to your Jeep. If they're in the maze, you drag them to your Jeep. But if they're outside the maze, you can't drag them. I don't know why. At that point, you have to drive your Jeep around. So you can drive your Jeep, and you can shoot from your Jeep. But if you take a corner too fast, you'll just run into an animal if they're right there. So you've got to be careful on how fast you go. If this is a little confusing, you're not alone. It's not that the rules are complicated. They're just kind of needless. They kind of take away from the fun of the game. I think instead of having all these caveats of going through and actually not being able to drag animals in certain spots, but being able to drag them in other spots and not being able to take your Jeeps in other spots, it would have been a lot easier just to say, hey, you need to go through, get as many animals into the pen as you can, rack up your high score, you get a set of each, you get a bonus. Simple enough. Out of the trilogy of Sega Vic Dual ports for the launch of the SG-1000, this is the weakest title by far. Borderline's okay, it's good. But next week we're going to look at the best one, N-Sub, so stick around for that. The SG-1000 was brilliant for shooters, and we're actually coming up on a pretty decent one, so tune in next week. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button below.